Yep. All right.
I don't remember. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Gus Monrowan, and I am the founder and executive director of a local nonprofit called Omaha Permaculture. And I'm very happy to be speaking with you through Zoom, the convenience of Zoom, as Mary just pointed out, here in the comfort of our own homes on a frigid Sunday afternoon. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else except with my fellow compatriots who are following green things, especially Green Bellevue. Green Bellevue is one of my favorite organizations. I used to be on the board. I learned a lot under Don and Ruth Richter. Great leadership, and I really am a cheerleader for this organization at all times. So I appreciate you having me back. Much has happened since I've been able to present here before, but I generally have a PowerPoint that I like to go through that goes through an explanation of permaculture, and then kind of focuses on our kind of Nebraska permaculture opportunities. And then I kind of round off this PowerPoint with talking a little bit about the nonprofit we have and what we're doing in North Omaha. As well as other places, Mason Park in Bellevue, and even Quail Creek in Bellevue. So anyway, I am going to share my screen here and bear with me while I get it running here. So there we go. Okay. Now press play. All right, everybody can see that. Okay, well, permaculture has many different meanings and what it means to people. I guess in the world of regenerative farming and many other terms that are out there, permaculture belongs in an urban application. And I think it also marries sustainable agriculture and conservation or environmental objectives. So today I'm going to speak to you about what we do to approach an ecosystem approach to community landscape management in what we do here in Omaha. And the first thing we deal with, and the biggest problem we see in front of us, is poor land use and poor stewardship of the land. And this is mostly expressed as in water quality, lower water quality that has been an effect of how we treat the land here in Nebraska, namely the western part, and then how water flows here towards the eastern part. We do many things here to have a robust economy. Most of our acreage, 93% of all of our acres, are devoted to agriculture. And you can even imagine the sand hills and all these places that you think seems really untouched, but they are all in some form used in agriculture. We're also first in commercial cattle, third in corn production and exports. And then we're also lead irrigation advocate. Actually, irrigation, center pivot irrigation began here. So these are some major industries that, and a reflection of what kind of state do we live in. And there are effects to this agricultural, to all of these agricultural endeavors. And this is a map that shows the nitrate levels. And granted, this is an older map. The newer map is not too much different. And the red areas and the orange and yellow are nitrates, and those are usually excess fertilizer or manure runoff. And all of this, as you can see, is following the Elkhorn River Valley up there and a little bit down in the Platte River Valley in the mid state there. So these are areas where we are applying a lot of fertilizer or we're raising animals. And so the high nitrates that are part of our state and part of our waterways now have residual effects that affect us who live in the urban centers and people who are trying to live and raise families.
So, and that's not regulated,
No,
right?
it is not.
There's no regulation. And so the way it affects us is it through the riverways, then it becomes part of our water source system and then is processed for Omaha use.
Exactly. And so you would have to come up with some kind of industrial way to remove nitrates out of the water. Most famously, you may be familiar with Des Moines Public Water Works.
Right.
They were spending almost $2 million a year to pull nitrates out of the water for Des Moines city, for the city itself. And in an interesting part of this, even though they removed the nitrates, they didn't really have an effective way of dealing with the nitrates once removed. But it was found out that the city actually would dump it into the Raccoon River below, downstream.
No.
So it would go right back in the river, even though it has potential health implications for anybody who lives downstream. Obviously, a little more diluted as it goes downstream, but then you add the full geographic expanse of all this farmland in the Midwest is then aggregating all of that fertilizer and those nitrates down into the Gulf of Mexico. So here, my next slide is talking about really the animal production that we now have. Of all the animals or mammals on Earth, 96% are livestock, and humans are only a small percentage of that. 36%, 60% are livestock. And you used to think that we live in a very a planet that has a lot of wildlife out there. Well, unfortunately, they've been relegated to some of the smaller refuge places on the planet. They're the smallest little wedges of land that they're afforded, and they represent about only 4% of the land animals and mammals and mass on the planet. And then here's another look. The graphic at the bottom is about the birds, and 70% of all birds on the planet are now chicken and poultry of some kind of domesticated animal, and then 30% are wild. Excuse me? Well, so these are unique elements of our world now. We have domesticated animals.
From India. Oh. They want to do a survey about.
First time I saw snow and when I came to America.
If somebody need to get their mute on. Is that okay? There we go. Well, and so basically this is the new world, and the way life is spread out on the planet. A lot of it is domesticated, and it's mostly for the purposes of human consumption. And I don't know if you can tell on the picture there, but the water doesn't look kind of a typical clear or blue that you might want to see, but it has kind of a green hue. And that is an unfortunate symptom, a representative of what green blue algae does, and the excess nitrates when it is in our water systems. But imagine if we didn't destroy these very important aquatic environments, and we had a minimal footprint. And instead of our consumerism driving the kind of destruction of these aquatic environments, what if we came up with more productive versions of this? And there's been numbers from the Center of Biological Diversity that 40% of all biodiversity loss has occurred in the last 40 years. So this is going back to that previous slide, but biodiversity and what makes these ecosystems move and operate. The main players of these ecosystems are struggling to survive, and it's due to a lot of major industries that are along all of our river systems and in every single state that we have here in the United States. And all of this is bleak, and it doesn't sound great. And there's hopefully there are people in industries that are trying to improve these this pollution that is polluting our water systems. But permaculture is an endeavor of sustainability that can be a solution, especially in the city centers. Permaculture is an endeavor that is guided by ethics. It is to take care of the earth and then take care of people. And then once you have fulfilled your conservation objectives and you're taking care of your family and anybody close to your family, then you turn to your community, anybody who needs community support in terms of extra time, basic needs of their lives. So this is a kind of a circle and a cycle, and that circle or cycle is a common theme throughout anything in permaculture, whether we're talking about a social with people, as in this regard, or with inputs and outputs and waste streams. You try not to waste much at all. Everything is hopefully interred back into the system as an input. So cycles and circles are very important in permaculture, following the life cycles that we see in nature. And so I'm going to spend the next 9 or 10 slides explaining what the width and the breadth of what permaculture entails. So I have a very long, lengthy permaculture definition. It takes a while to explain it, but I'm going to break it up in these slides. The top phrase at the top is part of the definition. So I will go through all of these parts. But permaculture is sustainable land use design. It is primary, and first off, it is designing the land in front of you to operate efficiently and fluidly according to nature's systems and nature's cycles. You understand where north is, understanding your cold north wind. The cold north wind here in Nebraska determines many different things, as well as in summer, the hot south wind also determines many things. Also the hot sun, being able to have a shade tree ends up being one of the most important things to have in summer. In winter, just being able to be on the opposite side of where that cold wind is coming from is also very important. But in this picture here, you see a waterway or some slopes and ridges. Well, all these slopes and ridges offer opportunities to catch water as it falls as rainfall or as snowfall, or is just seasonally moving through the property. So these are ways to take advantage of the high slopes, which might be drier, and then the lower slopes, the lower parts that are in the kind of flatter areas that will be able to tolerate drier spells because they probably have a water table very close to whatever you are planting, the trees and the crops and so forth. So understanding the dynamics, the wind direction, the sun direction, and then grades and slope end up being very important when you design for your homestead or for your property or for your community. All right, the next part of this definition, aside from it being land use design, permaculture is based on ecological and biological principles, often using patterns that occur in nature to maximize effect while minimizing wasted energy. You can see the two examples of patterns that nature just gives us. The Fibonacci spiral and is often repeated throughout nature, as well as the way that a stream meanders through the landscape. There's actually a system of why water meanders that way, and it kind of pulls and deposits the silt in these little directions. And then next time a wash of water comes through, it carves a new path. And so all these systems that are in nature are worthy of imitation because we can see them work in nature. Permaculture aims to create stable, productive systems that, sorry, I got to minimize my, to provide for human needs, harmoniously integrating the land and use with the participants. Sorry, I went ahead. Basically, I'd look for a photo that would exemplify humanity in harmony with nature and with the landscape around. And I like this photo. I chose this one because it shows agriculture being done on the lower parts, and then shows a little bit more relaxed aesthetic and a relaxed approach on the mountaintops. The mountaintops are the source of sometimes where water is first created from when it's on this on a snowy slope, and then it eventually comes down. But also the deciduous trees, if left untouched and not harvested and moved, all of the nutrients that come from the trees on these top upper layers will benefit the lower parts of this valley and will benefit everything without having to apply a fertilizer and having to apply more things. So the upper parts of the hills are a method to bring your own nutrition and then also protect the source of water, because that's where it accumulates, and then being able to charge the groundwater again and benefit everything below it. The ecological process of everything that is around us is so important. Basically, the nutrient cycles, the climate factors, and weather cycles, we're all part of the picture. These are all unique variables that are important to understand and also read how they are changing according to weather patterns and climate patterns that we are observing. The weather here in Nebraska, people talk about the weather a lot. I'm on a soccer team, and there are a lot of international people on my team, and they always say, hey, when I come to Nebraska, it seems like everybody likes to talk about the weather. And I think that's by design, because the wind can switch dramatically from a north wind to a south wind any day of the week, as we're watching right now. And these dramatic weather shifts is just part of living in Nebraska. And what is sustainable and what is native ends up being very important, because you won't be able to grow a lot of things that don't accommodate these very wide weather swings. So understanding the system that we live in is very important. Inhabitants' needs are provided for using proven technologies for food, energy, shelter, and infrastructure. And this is a cross-section of what people have called the Earthship. I believe there's someone in Nebraska that's built one out near Kearney. And as you can tell, it's trying to be completely off-grid. From filtering its own water, creating its own energy, and then dealing with its own waste. So these are some very important parts of the sustainability cycle and the built environment that we create for ourselves. Elements in a system are viewed in relationship to other elements, where their outputs of one element becomes the inputs of another. And this is what I was going back speaking with earlier, was about the circles and cycles. Inputs, knowing what your inputs for your system is important, and understanding what you are trying to produce. And hopefully your product leaves some waste so that they end up being able to be used as inputs for other parts of your system that could just help with soil fertility, or a feedstock or an input to another animal or another plant on your property. Within a permaculture system, work is minimized, waste become resources, and productivity and yields increase. The environment is therefore restored. So this is more of the passive part of permaculture, simply by letting nature do what it does best and not trying to kind of engineer or bring in technology more than is needed to create a system, design a system that is necessary, that will flourish despite changing weather patterns and climate patterns. Permaculture principles can be applied to any environment at any scale, from dense urban developments to individual homes, from farms and to entire regions. So here's a photo of one of our gardens in North Omaha. And then on the right is Mark Shepard's farm in Illinois. He has got, I believe, 150 acres where he is using this these permaculture principles of using the grade and using ecosystems to his benefit. And so here's the definition that we just went through for the last 7 or so slides. So it's very wordy, and I used to be able to just read it in front of people, but I think breaking it up, because it has all these pieces are very important of the story and the objectives we're trying to achieve in permaculture. And if we wanted to simplify what is being said in this definition, and things that actively you promote, you can do in your own backyard: catch and store rainwater, grow your own food, create your own resources, retrofit and try to conserve more energy in your own home, reduce or create zero waste. And then lastly, probably differentiating from any other systems, get to know your neighbors. Our community is part of the system. And the people and Green Bellevue, I do not have to tell this to you, but you are creating the perpetuation of these sustainability methods, and especially the reduce or create zero waste. I love that part of Green Bellevue. You guys do an amazing job. So all of these are simple things that you could strive in your own life to kind of work on to help alleviate some of the stresses in your backyard or ecosystem, or trying to make yourself more sustainable in your own community. And then here's a few cultural slides as I get into kind of the framing of our organization. This is just about land use. You can see a little photo of there. Here in America, all the homes are broken with little black pools in the backyard. And then there's a little photo of Switzerland and how they became more resilient after World War I and World War II, because they actually had to turn to their neighborhood and to their community to grow what is needed. And that neighborhood camaraderie is something that still is prevalent here in Europe to this day. It's basically a difference in land use dictated by a leisure culture, or one that's based on sustenance and sustainability. We grow things like cotton here instead of a lot of we could be growing more food in our urban centers. We could be growing more food for people instead of inputs for animals, or commodities, or just for sweeteners. These are all things that we could be doing in our food culture and our food corporate systems as well. And we've had our moments here in the United States where we do turn towards local food and locally produced, as this Victory Garden poster shows. Usually after recessions, United States, people in the United States, Americans, we tend to turn to community gardens, and we like to talk about it. But once good times return, community gardens are not as popular. They're not as important because the economy is returned back to its luster, and usually producing food and bringing food that is produced halfway around the world, which we are very lucky and fortunate to have that. But definitely being able to have our own food and be able to produce it is something that we should definitely be concerned about. So here at Omaha Permaculture, and I think most Nebraskans, we want to focus on the creation and protection of our garden soil, the soil that produces our food. I think this ends up being one of the more important things to do, and we can get a clue of how to protect and nurture soil from a local forest. When you walk through a forest and you can feel the soft feel underneath our feet, feels there's air in there, there's basically a chemistry going on, and basically all of the organic matter is being broken down by bacteria and other living organisms and turned into something that is productive, so that nutrients can be shared for the next generation of plants and animals. So a forest is a regenerative soil model, as well as a prairie is. We just need to imitate these systems in our own backyard, our gardens, or in our farms. And this ends up being one of the easiest ways to kind of to follow nature and what it is doing successfully. And so how do we apply something we see in nature to urban green spaces? For one, land use needs to be assessed in terms of your community. Here is a kind of all these little black dots are about in an area about 1.5 miles of radius, or actually this is diameter, 1.5 miles diameter, right around Adams Park in North Omaha. So all these are vacant properties, and all of these properties need to be mowed and maintained per city code. They're got to be picked up with trash. So this is a lot of maintenance that is just meant to kind of, maintain the status quo. So when Omaha Permaculture, when early on, when we saw this map, we saw this as an opportunity to use this land more proactively and more efficiently for the neighborhood, to be able to grow food for the inhabitants in the neighborhood around here. So this is a problem that is not just in North Omaha or in Omaha. It's in many small towns of Nebraska, as well as many cities and towns all over the United States, if not the world. Vacant land is owned by someone else and doesn't really have many objectives that are aligned with the community around it to turn that land into something productive. So this ends up being one of the problems that we can definitely improve upon in our own community. And urban agriculture is nothing new. Growing food in your own neighborhood is something that's always been done. Here's a photograph. I don't know if you can see the date at the bottom, but it's in Connecticut, 1917. But you can definitely tell it's a little bit of an urban atmosphere, and people are just walking through and harvesting food. This is something that is, we only now as a modern society think our food is grown outside the city. That's actually a new thing for the world. So given this context, how do we turn vacant land into something useful? And given our mission is to foster community through sustainable land stewardship. And we are a consultant to many groups to design edible community green spaces. That's one of the main ways we do this. We also collect organic waste from restaurants and churches to help build compost for our garden sites. We also work with community groups to enhance neglected vacant land to build ecological soil building techniques, and we're hiring new Americans for farmers. We also maintain landscapes for paying clients, and we are hiring people from the reentry system and other independent contractors. And then lastly, this ends up probably generalizing with what we're doing in general, but we're defending diminishing urban green spaces in the face of urban development. I feel like if you were to back out on a Google Earth shot, even of Bellevue, of this area, that granted, you may have seen farm fields for many of the years, the decades prior to now, and then prior to that, it was all prairie. But at least along the river system, there were trees and a lot of untouched land places, land where the soil would be intact and it would be doing something useful for the local ecosystems. So Omaha Permaculture, we like to work with properties that most other organizations do not. And it's mostly because the properties are, excuse me, I'm going to take a drink here. Most of the properties are hidden in the back in the community. They're not well lit, and they're usually good opportunities for people to kind of offload some of the things they don't want in their own house anymore. Granted, we do have dumpster days in our community, but they're seasonal. They're not very often. And throughout the year, people choose vacant lots as an opportunity to dump their TVs, their toilets, their tires, mattresses, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of this happen before in your own neighborhood. Hopefully, but this ends up being one of our biggest objectives. Our first thing we do is try to control this dynamic that happens. So when we walk on a property, we quickly try to clean it up, and then we put on a sign with our phone number and try to keep a curb appeal looking maintained. And this is kind of one of our most important formulas for how we maintain vacant property. Just by simply keeping a curb appeal looking nice, we're already dignifying and keeping these neighborhoods cleaner and a happier place to live. And so unfortunately, throughout the summer, people are hired as contractors for the city of Omaha, for the planning department, or for the land bank, or Habitat for Humanity. And not often do they get a chance to get off their zero turn, really fancy lawnmower to get up and pick the trash up. And so it just unfortunately gets just spread out and doesn't get picked up. So this is something that we focus on first. We walk through all the properties with volunteers to pick up the trash, the windblown trash, which is perpetual all year round, even in winter especially. And then when spring emerges and all that snow melts, you always get to see what has been hiding underneath all that snow, and it's usually quite a bit of trash as well. So basically, in order to keep these properties looking nice and dignified for the people who live there, these passes through the properties to keep them looking clean, it ends up being one of the most important things we do. And then lastly, we're trying to minimize the mowing on the properties. Yes, we do some mowing. We mow paths, we mow the curb appeal if there aren't plants there that are already creating a value. But we do plant bulbs at the curb appeal so that we can minimize the mowing, flanking the sign, the garden sign, and so forth. But we're definitely an organization that is not trying to teach people how to mow. We want to teach people how to use the garden space effectively so that you can reduce your mowing. Not to eliminate it, unfortunately. I think the code of Omaha Planning Department and the code enforcement, even in Bellevue, they want to see that the fact that your curb appeal is looking mowed and maintained, and your neighbors are going to say something if they don't agree with you. And that's just kind of normal here in the prairie state of Nebraska. But regardless, we are definitely trying to educate our community of why there are actually a lot of nutritious edible plants that are growing in that grassy yard, or in that weedy yard that you see. And so hopefully we're trying to educate the community to at least appreciate a different aesthetic that doesn't really need as much maintenance. And here's an example of a community garden in our neighborhood with raised beds. And raised beds are important if you did not have your soil remediated by the EPA, given the Asarco lead smelting plant that was in operation in Omaha up to 1998. So unfortunately, we were one of the largest Superfund sites in the country, and people had to remove the top 3 inches of their soil and get it replaced by cleaner soil. And then people usually put just sod over that. So this was something that has happened over the last 20 years here in Omaha, that cleanup process. We're on the tail end of that. I don't think much needs to be done anymore. But having said that, people urge you still to plant your garden in raised beds. While this is definitely important, I urge you to get your soil tested if you're at all considering to do a community garden. As with all of our properties, all our vacant properties, they have all been tested by the city itself. So they've all been found to be lead free to in approvable levels, so that we can grow food on these properties and use the ground itself and not have to use raised beds. But if you're at all concerned, definitely raise the beds and bring in your own soil. I think it just ends up bringing more cost to your endeavor of creating a community garden. Beds and the soil input are not cheap. It's only gone up during the pandemic as well. So if you're able to work with your own soil, we definitely try to inspire you to do so, because we think you can learn more in your garden and in your property if you have to deal with the actual soil and having to try to amend it or work with it in enhancing it over the years. So that soil enhancement improvement ends up being something of your objectives in when you're creating your community garden, and all the area in the back there with the trees, that all it becomes active garden space then, not just the areas where there is a box and some soil. The whole property ends up being an educational space instead of just the boxes. And there may have seen a kind of a neat Facebook or social media movement that was out there that was called Grow Food, Not Lawns. If you happen to have a south facing front lawn and your neighborhood is okay with you kind of changing it up a little bit, I urge you, we do not have any rules against doing this in Omaha. The only thing that would be a rule is if you have a covenant or a neighborhood association that says you can't do this otherwise. But either way, I urge you to do a quick survey with your neighbors, go and talk to them and maybe listen to their thoughts, and because they are going to be looking at it. And if they have any objections, maybe you want to flush that out earlier before you consider breaking ground. Yes. Oh,
unmute myself. So can you just point out what are some of the edible food that we're seeing in this picture? I can see some, I don't know, looks like some lettuce here in just behind the fence, the first thing. What are some of these other things that are growing?
yes, I see that. It's a little pixelated on my side. It's definitely some salads. I see a nasturtiums in the foreground. It could definitely be a row of, I see different colors of greens and blues. So there's some kales, but in really just the way they have this arranged, they're trying to hopefully create an aesthetic that looks organized. It looks manicured. It looks like it's not weedy. And I think there's ways to do it so that you don't necessarily have to make a pattern, or, you don't have to go too far, but I think being able to demonstrate that it's manicured and that it's a pride of your front yard. Not something that you have sown a bunch of seed out there and you're excited to let it be relaxed, or a relaxed aesthetic. I think that if you're putting it in your front yard, your responsibility to keep it more maintained and manicured is more important, because your neighbors will definitely have an opinion. And sometimes they're a little passive aggressive in how they state their opinions. So I think being able to discuss it with them ahead of time, and then at the same time trying to understand the aesthetics that can help frame in the front of the property. You can put edible plants framed in by floral plants, but more floral in that regard, or pollinator plants. Therefore, there's always kind of a framing in, or an accenting that doesn't make everything look like it's just a green plant with no blooms, for example. So I apologize, I can't name everything in front of me, but I think it's really just making an aesthetic statement of make it look nice. So try not to make it just look like an unruly garden that you rarely pass through. So so here are a few examples of just kind of a little bit more of the relaxed aesthetics on some of our gardens. And the garden you see in front is the same one. And this was not watered with irrigation. This was only rainfall throughout the season. And then we use wood chips to create the paths in between all of the planted areas. But you can see there's some shade, there's trees, and there are a lot of plants that grow in the shade and tolerate the mixed sun and shade, excuse me. And then in the foreground, you can see we let some kind of, it looks like pak choi or mustard, and we let it go to seed. Well, that allows, kind of a pollinator moment. We're not always quickly removing the previous plant to put in something else. Sometimes we are, but also noticing that these blooms, a lot of the people we work with through the New Americans and the refugees, they're eating these blooms too. All these blooms taste good in a salad. and they're and they're nutritional, and they add part of, you know, a diversity in your nutritional you know, diet for the week. So basically being able to eat all parts of the plant, and then understanding all parts of the cycle of the plant. Sometimes even the bean pods that are the you know, the seeds for the next year. It may not be a bean pod plant. It might not be beans, but it could be a radish, which is producing beans. But our new Americans, they pickle and they cook those bean pods off of a radish plant. So they're all the seeds, all the parts of a plant in many respects are edible. And being able to explore all parts of the plant is something I encourage everybody to do. And then the heroes of all of our properties are the insects and the pollinators. You may have been noticing there's been a lot of news stories over the last few years how the pollinators are struggling, and it's because of a lot of the things we're doing. Our roads are removing the pollinator habitats, the milkweed. I see Nancy Scott on here. She's a huge champion of all our pollinators. It's great to see you, Nancy. So the pollinators end up being and the habitat that is necessary to perpetuate our insects. So that means you're not going to be raking up all your leaves every fall, that all that leaf litter and all that messiness that looks messy around our trees and our bushes and our flowers, they should really stay there so that our insects have a full life cycle that can be protected, but also to be able to find food during parts of the year that you know, there aren't that many sources of food out there during 6 months of the year when it's winter. So understanding that all of that leaf litter and all of the what looks to us as dead and brown landscape litter of the plants, and you know, don't quickly cut it up and throw it away and put it in a bag and put it on the curb. A lot of this can be, you know, hidden in the corners of your neighbor or in your backyard, maybe in a fence or behind plants that you would see, to help create habitat, but also it holds moisture in, and then it is also creating the next generation of soil. So please, I urge everybody not to take all of their best leaf litter and backyard litter in, you know, take it to the curb and discard it. I think that our insects, for the one, you might be carting them in their cocoons and their chrysalises and their eggs, taking them out to the curb, and they're going somewhere else rather than in your backyard next year. We also nurture bird habitats. Those are calabash gourds that you can turn into tree bird houses. And then we love the bats as well.
Come in.
Important. And bat homes are very important. It helps control the insects.
Oh, Dad, the nursing staff is here to see you. Come back to see you already. Something on their mind.
So anyway, the basically protecting habitat and creating habitat ends up being one of the most important things in how we maintain.
CA comes. I'm gonna ask you about CA.
In something we've been finding is a northern prairie skink.
Yeah, sure. And you know, let's see, I keep trying to tell everybody that our friends on the weekend really like this particular cream for his son. His father. You know which one it
You have
is.
someone that needs a mute.
Yeah, you do. And I told you this morning. Okay. Oh, he told you yesterday. Oh, good. He is very thorough.
Hello, Charles.
Speaking. Sorry.
Can you put your Zoom on mute, the lower left-hand corner?
I thought that was the default. Sorry.
No worries, no worries.
Figure this out. Okay.
Yeah, I'm glad you noticed that. Thanks, Mary. So basically, under all of the vacant property, wind-blown trash and the discarded trash on these vacant properties, we've been finding an ecosystem. And one of the unsung heroes is the northern prairie skink. It's kind of like a little bit of a lizard, a little bit of a snake. or even a salamander. They're very unique, but I had no idea we had these here in Omaha, in Nebraska, until walking upon these vacant properties, picking up the trash, and then realizing something scurrying and living underneath these areas in these pristine, untouched properties where there are no sprays, there's no compaction, there's no disturbance of mowing. This is the type of place they want to be. And when we go back to that previous map of all those black vacant properties I showed you, these are perfect habitat places for the northern prairie skink, and they're living and flourishing in North Omaha. George Cunningham, he's a local enthusiast of our local reptiles, and he encourages you to maintain this habitat by putting something like a piece of plywood down, like a 4x4 square sheet of plywood out there in the backyard, because your garter snakes love that habitat, and so does the northern prairie skink. And they're just eating insects and doing what they do and living a very quiet lifestyle. And they're not too creepy. You may get spooked a little bit if you see them move, but it's really interesting and very amazing to see that this is part of our local wildlife. And most people never know this, never see this, because we manicure our living environments. And the northern prairie skink thrive in the untouched vacant properties. And then similarly, turkey and deer, they love to walk through these vacant properties and in the parts of the city that are just a little bit more relaxed and not mowed down. All those seed heads that are on the tops of plants and the seeds that are coming down from the trees, this is all food source for the deer, and the turkey and all the other birds that need to eat out of the backyards and out of these properties for the whole winter. This urban ecology depends on us to be a little lazier with our leaf cleanup and our leaf management and just basically overall maintenance. Here's an example. I have a little video of one of our typical days. We go on a bio blitz once a year, and we've been doing it for 7 years. And we have George Cunningham here, Dr. Burke, and Dr. Sutherland of UNO. Dr. Burke is an entomologist. Dr. Sutherland's a botanist at UNO. And we've documented every living species, insect and plant and tree, on 9 vacant properties for the last 7 years. So we have kind of a moving chart trying to get comprehensive living species on all these properties. And then we hope to be telling a story about climate change and the expression of biodiversity, and how does the biodiversity around us change year to year depending on weather or climate. So this is something we've done many times, and it's one of our cheapest programs. It doesn't take much to do this. It's basically just getting the community out, and we all get to listen to the professors talk about the insects and talk about the plants that depend on, and the insects that depend on the plants. So all these properties, by the time we have this event, we make sure that we leave some of the property unmowed so that there is something attracting all of those insects. So it's definitely coming up with a balance of making these properties look suitable for the neighborhood, but at the same time, making sure that there's habitat for the community every year, or for the ecosystem community. Oh, you also saw Graham Herbst there. He's a Nebraska forester. He's on our board. But going through and rummaging through all the trees and documenting and bringing something to Dr. Sutherland is always an exciting part of the day. We get to learn about the whole life cycle of how the plant and that insect evolve together, and how that system is dependent on stable climate and basically stable ecosystems. And here's a forest property we have in North Omaha, and we have a few picnic tables in there, just allowing people to come out and enjoy an urban forest that is not typical of what you would may see in a park. Instead, we're going to hopefully create some opportunities to to cultivate mushrooms and things on a forest property like this. But similarly, some of them are open and offer different opportunities that are more open for, with good sun so that you can grow gardens. Okay. And so what I mentioned earlier about the BioBlitz, it's now our 7th year. And now we're adding to it the fact that we have a new headquarters in North Omaha. We're constantly adding more insects, more plants to the list that we have been documenting through this data for the many years, the 7 years. We're adding birds now that we have a tour going through with the Audubon Society of Omaha. They are helping us create the database for mostly the birds that are here in Omaha, but we will be adding more parts of the year so that we understand the migratory patterns in the different birds coming through at different times of the year. Here's a neat photo we took years ago. Instead of mowing one of our properties, we were able to work with a local farm so they could bring out their goats and to see if they would actually make a dent in helping us mow down some of the property. The goats attracted some of the kids in the neighborhood. It ended up being a really fun day. Aside from the fact that we had to chase a goat, through over a fence or two, that was the only thing that we didn't really enjoy, but it was still a very, very exciting day. Everybody got to enjoy what it may have been like here in Omaha, decades ago, as people mowed their own properties with their livestock. This is something that I have discovered did happen in Omaha up to roughly 1995. I guess along the railroads, Omaha was hiring someone who was a shepherd, mostly with sheep, to mow down and keep the railroad looking clean and not with a lot of tall grasses throughout the year. So this is something that is not in the too distant past, and is probably something that we could bring back if the zoning would allow. And so I'm going to get into a few other permaculture techniques while I, more of educational, while I'm talking to what we're trying to do on the properties themselves, because we're not trying to be heavy-handed with these properties. We don't remove everything. We understand that there's a canopy layer, there's a lower tree layer, a shrub layer. There are different layers of a property, of existing plants and trees, and understanding their role of what they're doing in the subsoil. As you can see, those different root depths, they're doing different things, and they're creating different environments for the soil. Hopefully in the long term, breaking it up, adding nutrition to it season to season, and then allowing it to become more nutritious over the years. So understanding, the soil temperature, the depth of roots in your garden and in your property, and what is going on, and how to design it so that it's facing south to be able to get the best sun, but also catching some of your best water. These are all parts of the puzzle of creating a garden space that is sustainable. It is a good example. Aside from what Jackie's doing with her hand watering can there, that's the only kind of watering we did on this property. That's a before and after. And she was just watering in the seeds. But the below photo is seasonal moisture, just rain, no sprinklers, no nothing. And they're all different types of plants that we've sectioned and just hopefully keeping up with the weeding. And so one of the most ideal situations in our climate, where we have south is the direction where we are, where our sun comes from. And so as you can see, that horseshoe shape is called a perennial edible sun trap if you point it. And on the north side would be trees that act as a windbreak. So you're kind of protecting your ability to have smaller plants and smaller food producing items in the trap itself, and you're creating it warmer there longer for the year. So in spring, you will be warmer earlier, and in fall, you'll be warmer longer and later. So basically it's extending your season by designing a property. And the scale here, as much as we do it on our vacant properties at about a 1/4 acre scale, this is ideally done at an acre or more. If you can create enough of a windbreak, and you can do a lot more with it. But having said that, the northern part there that's creating that windbreak could be, an adjacent house, a house or a garage behind you, and that's creating your sun trap. Just using this kind of as a model to create the most efficient way to absorb sun on your south, but then not block it with tall trees, and then putting your taller and more windbreak structures on the north side. So this is just a concept in permaculture that we try to imitate as a formula for many of our vacant properties. Another neat concept is called hugelkultur, and it's basically done by digging a ditch and putting in old and new logs, wood that's decomposed, some that's fresh, leaves, and you're filling it, and then you kind of cover it with soil and bury all of this kind of decomposing things. And if you can imagine, it's kind of what happens in a forest when a tree falls down, and then the root ball all comes up and it pulls all this soil, and it buries things, and it buries living things. So it's trapping, and it's kind of making it a nutritional coffin in some respect, or a place where it's holding and trapping all that nutrition to slowly release itself over the next 2 to 5 to 10 years. And 10 years only if you build this concept big enough. I've seen people do it as tall as a person, simply because if you can imagine, because it's a mound, you could be planting vegetables and be harvesting what you wanted at waist level, because it's on a hill. So you wouldn't be bending over. So this is a neat concept in permaculture that uses space efficiently and in packed in ways, so that it has an application here in a city. But it definitely involves a lot of earth moving. But once you've built this hugelkultur mound set up in your garden, you don't have to touch it for the duration of its decompression and slowly using up that nutrition over the years that you have it. So this is just a concept and an example of using passive systems to have your garden every year. But there are more parts of the system that you need to understand. There's trees and shrubs that, like I showed in that canopy slide, but there are many functions that are going on from the trees and shrub layer. They have the root systems. There's the shade and the shelter part. They have fruits and nuts. They're providing a wood even. The wood out of some of these trees and shrubs can be reused and is part of the life cycle, and using them to your benefit is something that is possible. Animal insect habitat, obviously, and the soil properties. And then the vines can keep things cooler just by covering things and making by them their ability to cover things that you don't want hot. And then the herbaceous plants that come back every year, they're mostly used as a cover crop or a way to just kind of fill in areas so that they look pretty. But basically, if you can use these herbaceous plants to somehow create a function of adding nutrition to your soil or doing some other things other than just the aesthetics, that's something that we should always strive for in our designs. Fruits and nuts, definitely, the most important part of a lot of what we see from the edible plants and trees, not just for us on the human consumption side, but we got to make sure our raccoons and our squirrels and other birds have plenty to eat out there as well. And then the wood. So as I mentioned, even when they, have the trees have passed on, they have another life. They can have a life as built infrastructure, built tables, like I said, picnic tables, benches, garden signs, a lot of these things we are now building at Omaha Permaculture for garden infrastructure. As I mentioned, cover crops. There are many ways to kind of fill an area to make it look prettier. Even this squash plant is covering a whole area of your lawn, if you let it, that you don't have to mow while it's growing. So I technically call squash and what it can do on your front lawn a cover crop. So and then borage here, and there are a lot of really important plants. And then a lot of people don't think of it, but there are many plants out there in your own backyard in the native category, and that can serve as tea, dried leaves, and being able to understand the aromatics that come from the plants, and then being able to put it in your tea. I think there's something very exciting about that process, and knowing that you're creating your own tea in your own backyard. And then a very important part, going past with that passive system in permaculture we're trying to imitate, is trying to find the plants and trees that fix nitrogen in the soil. And we don't have a whole lot of them. Black locusts and red buds are supposedly nitrogen fixers. They're called legumes. Anything that has a bean pod is considered a legume. Soybeans are a legume, and being able to grow something, wild senna, any of these types of plants will be making your next generation of planting something hopefully a lot easier, with that next plant being much more successful. Thank you to the nitrogen fixers. Here are a few examples, and kind of an example of the variegated leaves, or not the variegated, the kind of opposing leaves you need to see in what are normally the nitrogen fixing families. And so these are all good, important techniques. I'm going to get into a little more of the social parts of what we're doing here. In order to get out and maintain and understand the properties, but we got to create groups, volunteer groups. And if you go around the circle here, some of the people we get together that are from corporations, and they are excited to get out of their cubicle world, or in this case, also the pandemic world, out of their Zoom lifestyle, and come out and build a picnic table with us. So we solicit donations to be able to build the picnic table for these project days or workshops. And then the above photograph on the right, we were working with the Omaha probation department, and some of these individuals were very helpful, but they wanted to be involved and help out with the property. And they helped maintain one property in particular, that forested property I showed you earlier. And here we are. We had a project day with some of their arresting officers. So this was a fun day. They brought out some Burger King, and they shared it with some of the individuals. And you never know who you're talking to. I've had some great educational experiences with the probational participants. They are eager to learn. They are eager to be involved with society and get back and learn even the natural components, the things. I'm talking about my favorite tree. I don't necessarily think they're listening, but the next day they'll ask me about it. So it's definitely, you wonder who absorbs and who's thirsty to absorb all of this knowledge that is in our own neighborhoods. And you don't be dismissive of who you're speaking with, because everybody is excited to learn more of what's growing in their own backyard. So I've had amazing experiences with groups. Obviously less so during the pandemic. We had less group days, but now as we're emerging again, it's great to be out there as a group and learn from people that know a lot more, people who can help lead the group, as well as the youngsters. They always have a new perspective to add as well. And then this is a unique component, but our new Americans, or the refugees we work with, they have very, very exciting ways of farming. You can see that lower middle photo there. That's Dr. Sutherland walking through two what I would call pallet walls of beans. And they're almost 8 feet tall there, as you can see. But they eat all parts of the plant, as you can see in that lower left-hand picture. Those are all the kind of leaves and the sprouts coming from them before even the beans come out. So this is going to go into their stir fry for the evening. And then Saklar in the upper left, he's been one of my longest serving farmers groups. He's part of a Korean group. He is the pastor at a mission church. And they're farming a 2.5 acre garden that I showed earlier, feeding over 130 people in the summer. And so, and here is that property actually. So, let's see here. I may have to move my bar here so I can see this again. Okay.
So I have a question when.
Yeah, please do.
So like a property like this, or any of these abandoned, or what you would call unused, vacant, that was the word you used, vacant properties, they're owned by someone. So in this particular photograph, do you have to pay rent for that landowner, or are they happy to have you using the land? How does that work with the owner of these various vacant properties?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Mary. And honestly, in this regard, in this example, the city of Omaha Planning Department owns this or maintains it. And it's about 8 different conjoined vacant properties that used to be row houses. There used to be houses very similar to the ones that you see in the distance there, that are actually newer homes there. To the right, off camera, off the photo here, is a local fire station. And the fire station is very helpful, and they fill up these rainwater tanks. But this ends up being one of the best examples, because being able to provide water to this garden, or any garden, is always a struggle, a hurdle. But because we're right next to a fire station, it ends up being quite easy, because a lot of fire department people that are fire attendants, they are very good gardeners themselves. So it is definitely a shared interest, and they love seeing the success of this area. This past year, you may be aware that I think your question opens me to another story here, but you may be aware that the city of Omaha is creating an affordable housing development plan. And this particular property, which is 2.5 acres, somebody approached the planning department in January of 2022 and said, hey, I am interested in this property right here on 18th and Burdette Street. And they told the city, hey, we want to buy it from you. And we lease it for a very low price from the city. And we've done that for 5 years. And I approached the city about buying it a few years ago, but they were not very interested. They said they may have a use for it someday. Long story short, in January, earlier this year, the city allowed me to defend our use of the property, Omaha Permaculture and the Korean group, under a community development law. And we were allowed a rebuttal. We are allowed to defend why we should be keeping this as a community entity, a community garden. And so I wrote a rebuttal to the planning department, and it was reviewed by the head planner. And we have many champions and friends within the planning department itself, and they were very supportive. And so they were also an internal cheerleading crew while I was writing the rebuttal. So it was not only entirely on my rebuttal, but I think the entire planning department was cheering for us. But in my rebuttal, I cited Omaha Police Department statistics. On the Omaha Police Department website, they have a map that is retroactive. So you can click on a block in a geographic part and then be able to look in previous years as to how has crime changed in this block over the years? And it'll tell you whether it's nonviolent or violent crime, what kind of crime has been there. Well, anecdotally, granted, there was no study performed or anything, but I alluded to the fact that this particular property was one of the roughest areas in town about 10 to 15 years ago. And right across the corner there, you can see those are the Ernie Chambers apartments that are right at 18th and Burdette Street. And then obviously that's the Omaha skyline. So this was the worst place in Omaha. And so I was able to kind of roughly, allude to this history, and people acknowledged it. But then also to look at our stewardship, while we've been maintaining it for the last 5 years, even during the pandemic, and to be able to notice that crime has gone down on this property and that there's no violent crime here anymore. And then because we walk through and we pick up the windblown trash and we keep this whole block looking clean, the dignity and the opinions of everybody in the neighborhood, they like it. So they're going to defend us. So in general, we've created a community that is safer. And we defended against an affordable developer. To be able to use this property, and this is prime real estate in North Omaha. This could have been used for anything. And we defended it to be able to use as garden space in North Omaha. And we've now been able to do that a couple times. With our new headquarter property, which we just bought this summer, we have also brought 8.4 acres out of what could have been development, and rather than conservation or green space. So we have been pulling more land out of what would be development land. And most of the land that, I'm just describing, that garden as well as our land here, may not serve as the most ideal development spaces, but there are not that many open spaces left. So developers are very anxious to look at any property that has a large swath of land at a time. And so this 8.4 acres that we now own, I misspelled greenhouses there, are definitely part of what we're doing. And being able to pull land and be able to use it as natural space is something we want to do. And with this property, we will host workshops and community events. We were just recently awarded a USDA planning grant to create a community kitchen in that main office building right there on site. And then there will someday, you can see it, be a community bike trail, and they're going to begin constructing that within the next year or two. And then lastly, this whole space is going to be our demonstration site, where we demonstrate sustainability, food production, and conservation, and the fact that they are not mutually exclusive, that you can grow food without considering those animals or those birds as pests, that they're actually part of the system. So this is our new home headquarters, and this is a rendering. We had an artist put this together for us. And that long building right in the foreground, that is an old railroad depot building that used to store and dry wood for most of the 20th century. We are actually returning it to much of that function. We mill our own lumber, and then we dry it just like it was done back then up on the second deck of this property, of this large building. And that second deck, if you can imagine, gets very warm in summer. And so it definitely cooks it despite not having a solarization approach. And then it even does a good job in winter of drying out the wood, because moisture laden air is heavier. And so it actually wants to fall from the wood slabs out from that second deck. So there's a really good use for this building that we're already trying to imagine in our future revenue. And this is a great photo of just to kind of create an example of what permaculture can do and produce. So this was a photo of a countertop of one of our first years. It was like 2015, 2016, and we had some many volunteers that were excited to plant a garden and plant on one property. Well, we lost those volunteers roughly June and July after they had planted it. And unfortunately, that garden was overtaken with weeds. We didn't get a chance to weed it all summer. But we went back there in the 1st of October, and underneath all of those weeds, we found all this food. All this was on one property of a neglected garden. And it was your annual rainfall was fine. There were dry spells like a normal summer, but regardless, even if you neglect your garden, but you just put them in, you will probably get some food. Obviously everyone wants to see a tidy garden and something weeded. But I think a lot of people are scared to make those first steps. You know, they're worried that they're going to do something wrong or they don't know how to do things. Well, even if you just did the first step and you threw it out like a bird and you just threw them and they fell on the ground, and hopefully do it in a way that, you know, aligns with the bird, with the rain or after a rain, maybe step it and squish it in the mud a little bit more, you might get some food. You know, it's not as difficult as you imagine. And I love to be able to enable people and dispel all those fears of how fun gardening and farming can be, and also nutritious. And that's, I think, a lot of what we want to be able to educate our community about. We want to grow a better future. We work with a lot of people that are, you know, in our school systems, but we definitely need everybody to help. We are Omaha Permaculture. We're fostering community through a sustainable land stewardship. We're working through vacant properties and trying to improve the soil. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation today. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I haven't really looked at the chat. I see one on there, but we're definitely ramping things up for Giving Tuesday this month. If you'd all want to consider donating to OP, we would definitely appreciate your donation. We're reinvigorating this old property and the old building to hopefully be a community center with a community kitchen and help out the lower income people of our community.
Gus, this was very impressive, and it just pleases me to no end to see the development, the expansion, and the growth of Omaha Permaculture through your leadership. So thank you for everything and for this wonderful presentation. What I want to ask, you're getting so large and now the new center and continuing to expand. Where are the resources for the volunteers, the grants? How do you keep it all going so successfully?
Well, that's an excellent question. And thank you for all those nice thoughts. And, you know, it's definitely a roller coaster. I've never done this before, so I'm learning on the way. But I've had great mentors like yourself, Don, and my board, the board that is guiding me also are very involved, and they definitely help me along the way. I cannot say that I know everything or know how to do this at all. I'm very lucky and fortunate to have a board that is engaged, and they will also want to see this succeed. This year was a big test because we had to start a capital campaign last year. You know, doing a capital campaign during the pandemic sounded daunting, but I really had no choice. We were faced with a property that we really wanted, and there were not that many opportunities to raise the funding for an acquisition. A lot of COVID relief funding wasn't really stipulated for the acquisition of things. So we had gone after some grants that were hopefully going to squeeze us in, but it just didn't work out. So we were on that property for 3 years during the pandemic, and just kind of biding our time and being patient and hoping that it would work out for us. But putting that capital campaign together last year, and then holding on to those funds and not exhausting them while we're trying to do operating, doing the day-to-day operation, that was tough because being able to stay true to our narrative and then understand that the bids that we're getting for fixing things, the supply chain problems or the inflation of fixed costs like a roof, just within the course of 6 months, the cost grew quite a bit, and these were things that, we had fixed a budget earlier this year. And as much as, fixing a budget is sometimes seems like an exercise of putting a spitball on a wall. You don't quite know how it's all going to play out, 6 to 8 months later. And so I did have some trying times as we're trying to lock in our contractors and things were late. And but as a small nonprofit, it wasn't too stressful. I'm sure large organizations can weather this storm easier, but right now we exist. We own the property. We have a fixed roof. We have water installed, and we don't have any debt. So I feel I feel like we've achieved some things, but it does mean we have to keep on going and ask everybody for constant help, because it's a thing that is it's amazing that we were able to get the property. I keep checking myself, and pinching myself is, oh my gosh, 8.5 acres in the middle of Omaha. One of our sister organizations, City Sprouts, they kind of wanted to make a similar step of getting more land for themselves. Well, they weren't able to find anything kind of in town like what we were able to find. So their new headquarters and their new site is going to be north of Carter Lake. So once again, it's just the land is becoming used up, and we have many more needs in the cities. And to be able to achieve and lock this in for our organization and use it in a way to hopefully demonstrate what I see as sustainable and efficient use of land. I think that it'll pay dividends for our community for many, many decades.
Well, thank you for your efforts. My goodness, I agree with Don. That's remarkable. Fun to catch up with all you've been doing, Gus.
Well, thank you. Yes, no, it's always been, I appreciate everything Green Bellevue is doing, and I would not be here. I honestly, the board that Don and Ruth Richter ran when I was there, I was like, I learned so much from you, and I really I take those lessons with me every day when I'm in front of my board and my committees. And the leadership that I learned through the Green Bellevue organization is something that it's invaluable to me. So, and I really appreciate that time and that tenure.
Yes, Gus, very impressive. You have a great organization. Love what you're doing. Hey, you mentioned something about collecting composting from restaurants and such.
Yes.
Say we got a couple high schools in Bellevue that want to do some composting. Is there any chance that that we could work with you?
Well, let's see here. So
Actually, just the short answer right now, so we don't have to keep
Okay.
everybody. But is there hope?
there is. If you're not able to work with soil dynamics and you need a more cost-effective approach, we could probably figure something out. And more importantly, we could probably connect it with the new Mason Park design and maybe create a composting station there that we can kind of create and formalize so it looks tidy and the neighborhood likes it. But Mason Park we're turning that into something, and being able to collect compost for that future bioretention garden would be pretty cool. So rather than me coming down with a truck down to Bellevue and then taking it back up to Omaha, I would love to figure out a way to keep it in Bellevue and being used somehow effectively. Great question, though.
Yep. Thank you. Say, we'd want to keep everybody forever, but I did have a few announcements. Are there any last words before I do my minute and a half spiel? Okay, Gus, thank you so much for doing this. First, everybody, I don't know, probably everybody's muted, so I'm not sure how you applaud, but you know, send Gus some love because that was awesome.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Thank you. No, I really appreciate it. And honestly, like, I mean, Nancy on the phone and Ruth's here and Don's here. I honestly, I'm cheerleaders of you guys as equally. So we're all doing great work. Mary, honestly, I heard you're doing your new sustainability blog. Honestly, I'm excited to hear about that. So I think we're all doing great work. We all need to kind of stay in touch and keep up with what each other are doing, and then help out with the networking and the fundraising. We have a lot of work that still needs to be done. So.
Okay, so now I need to move to quick announcements. Hey, if somebody needs to be on our emailing list, just let us know at admin, ADMIN, admin@greenbellevue.org. Mary, who Gus was just talking about, Mary Ferdig, has a Sustainability Leadership Institute where they're rethinking leadership for a sustainable future. And it may be as early as January when she does our January program, or maybe not quite that then, but anyway, we're talking. Mary will develop some practice exercises that fit the kinds of interactive circumstances, challenges, and dilemmas that participants have experienced or may experience in the future. It's skills building, it's practice, it'll be great. So keep your eyes on that. For February program, or maybe that'll be Mary's, we're also sometime soon going to have Saving Grace Perishable Food Rescue give us a talk. It will be awesome. You don't want to miss that one either. Yet to be scheduled. I also want to take this time to, we should thank Don Preister and Tom Ruse, who are stepping down from Green Bellevue's board. They're stepping down because, well, those doggone bylaws say, you know, anyway, but Don's not leaving us. He will continue with the board as our esteemed advisor, and Tom will be around, as he will still be around planting trees and such. We want to welcome two new board members, Shauna Gorman and Karen Smith, and welcome back Ruth Richter, who will be is on our board again. Let's see. Also, we have a new student rep from Bellevue West, Jackie Petro. Want to let you know who our new executive committee is. Our president is Tyler Moore. Our vice president is Jeremy Bowers. Our treasurer is still, and good deal, that is Jennifer Hulsher. And our secretary is Ruth Richter. So, hey, thanks for sticking around for the announcements. And hey, if anybody has any questions, ask away. We'll be on for just a short while more. And there's Gus. It's big as day right in front of me. So so I don't have to sign off. Anybody need to ask Gus some more questions or talk about anything?
I'm pleased to have joined you today and wanted to get a nice feel of Green Bellevue and your work and your focus and today's great guests. So what a fun meeting to visit. So thank you very much.
Yeah. And Mary, did you have any words that you felt inspired to share about what you might be doing here as early as January?
Well, as you know, my background has to do with the study of human communication in all ways. And so, of course, it applies to any kind of leadership interaction. And one of the things that I'll be focusing on is how do we engage with others and carry this message of sustainability through our communication. And of course, communication means lots of things the way I know. Define it. And that's part of what I'll be sharing. So
Awesome. It seems like that's a very timely thing, considering you just half the population can't speak to the other half. and vice versa.
Yeah.
So,
So we're generating together our realities
Yeah.
through our human interaction and our choices. So.
Yeah.
Wow. Great to see you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
See ya.
Well, Gus, do you have anything else? Anybody else got any questions for Gus? As we sign off?
Great program. Thank you for organizing, Steve. Gus, thank you for doing it. And go Mason Park and all the permaculture sites all over the city and counties, plural.
Yes, yes. I agree. Thank you, Don. Thank you always. Thank you, Steve.
Oh, you bet, Gus. Thank you. This is wonderful.
Sure.
Thank you for doing the good work or great work. That is the great work.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your Sunday. It's kind of our little warm spell here.
Very good. Well, thank you, everyone.
All
See
right.
you next time.
See ya.
Bye.